You know how sometimes you want to really get to grips with something, properly understand it, but without drowning in information?
Yeah, cut through the noise.
Exactly. That's what we try to do here. And today, we're looking at a piece of history that, well, it has some really fascinating echoes for how information works right now.
It really does. We're diving into 17th century England, looking at how the Quakers emerged,
Mm,
and specifically how their writings acted as this powerful counter-narrative against the dominant powers of the day.
right. And we've got some great material to work with, excerpts from a study, The Quaker Counter-Narrative. It looks at their early stuff, pamphlets, letters,
Hmm.
and connects it to things like modern media theory, even propaganda. Really interesting stuff.
It is. So the mission for this deep dive, basically, is to figure out how this group often, really pushed to the margins and persecuted.
Yeah.
How they use communication, words, to challenge everything. And maybe more importantly for listeners, see what lessons or parallels we can spot for today's world.
Okay, let's get into it. 17th century England. Sounds like things were pretty chaotic. What was the backdrop for Quakerism starting up?
Oh, absolutely chaotic. A time of huge upheaval. Religious, political. The Civil War had just finished. The monarchy was back.
Right, instability.
Total instability. And lots of questioning of, well, everything traditional. And in that mix, you get people like George Fox, Margaret Fell.
Key figures.
Yes. And they start talking about the core Quaker idea, the inner light. This sense that everyone has a direct connection to the divine, no intermediaries needed.
That sounds, well, pretty revolutionary for back then, wouldn't you say? What did that mean for the official church?
Oh, it was a fundamental challenge. If everyone has the inner light, you don't really need priests, do you?
Right. Or rigid church structures, ritual.
Exactly. So the Church of England, even the Puritans, they saw this as, frankly, dangerous heresy. And the reaction was harsh.
Harsh how? Just theological arguments or more tangible consequences for people.
Oh, much more tangible. We're talking serious persecution. Imprisonment was common by 1680. Maybe 10,000 Quakers have been locked up in England.
10,000. Wow.
Yeah. And sadly, hundreds actually died in prison. The conditions were terrible, and they wouldn't compromise their beliefs.
So you can absolutely see why getting their own story out, their counter-narrative, was just essential for survival even.
Definitely, it was vital.
So how did they actually do that in such tough environment, no internet, no mass media as we know it?
Well, no, but there was something happening. The mid-17th century saw this explosion in printing.
Ah, the print revolution.
Exactly. The Civil War had fueled this huge surge in pamphlets, broadsides, debates happening in print. And the Quakers saw this, and they grabbed it.
So they were early adopters using print to push back.
Absolutely. And not just, one or two people writing things down. It was organized. A real flood of Quaker pamphlets and papers in the 1650s especially. They had systems. They'd read them together in meetings. They even archived them. Print became absolutely central to who they were, and it was a tool of resistance.
Resistance, especially when laws were passed against them, like that Quaker Act.
Precisely. The 1662 Act banned their meetings. So just writing and publishing became, in itself, an act against the state, an ideological fight.
Okay, so what were they actually saying in these pamphlets? What were their big arguments or strategies? How did they try and win people over, or at least defend themselves?
They were really smart about it, very strategic. One key thing was using the Bible, Scripture itself, and their ideas about equality to kind of flip the script on their opponents.
Flip the script. How?
Take Margaret Fell's pamphlet from 1666, Women Speaking Justified.
Just the title sounds bold for that time. What was she arguing?
She was directly tackling the idea, pushed hard by the churches, that women had to be silent in religious matters.
Right, a standard interpretation then?
Yes. But Fell goes straight to the Gospels, to the resurrection story. She points out very cleverly that it was women who Christ first told to spread the news of his resurrection, to the male disciples, no less.
Ah, using the foundational story against the silencing. That is clever.
Isn't it? She basically asks, what if the men hadn't believed the women then? Where would Christianity be?
Good question.
So she holds up these women as the first gospel messengers. What critics saw as female weakness, she reframes as spiritual strength, arguing this is true, early Christianity. It's a brilliant move against both religious patriarchy and social norms.
That's a fantastic example. Using the established framework scripture to argue for something pretty radical. What other kinds of rhetoric did they use?
Well, they also didn't shy away from going after the moral authority of the clergy, the elites. George Fox, especially.
The founder.
Yeah, he was blunt. He denounced what he saw as corruption, false prophecy in the official church.
How did he phrase that? Was it general or more pointed?
Oh, very pointed, very strong language. In one letter, 1653, he tells followers the light of Christ exposes the deceivers, the antichrists.
Strong words indeed.
And then he names names, basically.
Yeah.
The priests, the preachers in England, he calls them hirelings, people seeking status, wanting the best seats, making a prey of the people.
Ouch!
Yeah. He claims that true light opposes all of that. So he's not just disagreeing theologically, he's painting the established church as the enemy of true faith.
So definitely no subtlety there. Direct accusations of hypocrisy and being unchristlike.
Absolutely. And he'd compare them to villains from the Bible, Cain, Balaam, even figures from Revelation like the beast.
Wow, that's classic counterpropaganda, isn't it?
Totally. Frame the establishment as darkness, frame yourselves as the light, create that stark us versus them. It empowers your followers, makes them feel righteous, like the early Christians facing persecution.
Really building that in-group, out-group feeling.
Yes. And another fascinating thing they did was how they handled insults, like the name Quaker itself.
Right, that started as a mockery, didn't it? A judge making fun of them.
Yeah, supposedly mocking Fox for telling him to tremble or quake at the word of the Lord. But instead of ditching the name,
They owned it.
they owned it. They started calling themselves the people in scorn, called Quakers, right there in their own writings. Took the sting out of it.
That's brilliant. Like linguistic judo, turning the attack back.
Exactly. Undermines the power of the label. And alongside that, they constantly stress their own innocence, their moral high ground, especially when facing all that persecution.
How did they pull that off? It must be hard to project moral superiority when you're being actively attacked and imprisoned.
Well, one key way was by meticulously documenting everything that was done to them, to show the injustice, to try and get empathy.
Like keeping records?
Precisely. A key text here is the Declaration from the Harmless and Innocent People of God, called Quakers, which they sent to King Charles II in 1660.
Okay, what was the context? Why then?
Well, the monarchy was just restored, and there was a lot of fear about radical religious groups maybe causing trouble, being seditious.
So the Quakers were suspect.
Highly suspect. So this declaration was a direct attempt to kill that narrative.
And what was the core message?
Total commitment to peace. They state unequivocally that they renounce all outward wars and strife and fightings with outward weapons for any end or under any pretense whatsoever.
Very clear.
Crystal clear. They're saying our core principle is peace. It was a really strategic move to reassure a nervous government that they weren't a threat to public order.
Proactively tackling the jealousy and suspicion, as they put it.
Exactly. They even quote Jesus telling Peter to put away his sword. They're using scripture again, but this time to prove their peacefulness. The whole tone is reasonable, patient, morally upright.
It sounds like what we might call soft power today, appealing to conscience.
That's a great way to put it. And they backed it up with those books of sufferings you mentioned earlier.
Like records of persecution.
Yes. Detailed accounts of fines, imprisonments, abuse. Publishing this wasn't just about recording history. It was about showing the world, look what's happening to innocent people. Appealing to empathy, putting pressure on authorities.
And drawing parallels to early Christians, maybe?
They did that explicitly. It reinforced that image. A righteous minority suffering for their faith, just like in the Bible.
It's just amazing how these, 350-year-old tactics resonate with modern ideas about media, influence, propaganda. The study we're using makes those links directly, right?
Absolutely. What the Quakers were doing with their pamphlets, it's very much like what we see with alternative or counter media today.
How so? Give us an example.
Okay, think about agenda setting theory.
Remind us quickly.
Basically, the idea that media might not tell you what to think, but it heavily influences what you think about by choosing what stories to cover prominently.
Got it.
The Quakers, even without newspapers, were kind of doing that. Their constant stream of writings forced issues like religious freedom, abuse of power, things the authorities wanted ignored, into the public conversation.
So they were setting an alternative agenda.
Exactly. Their declarations, those suffering reports, they put those issues on the table. It was like an early form of alternative press fighting the official narrative, pushing past the gatekeepers. Still relevant today, that struggle.
And the government trying to shut them down. That also sounds familiar. Controlling the information flow.
Oh, completely. It mirrors modern attempts to silence dissent online or clamp down on independent reporting. And this whole dynamic the Quaker writings versus the establishment's response, it really lines up with the propaganda model from Herman and Chomsky.
Okay, the propaganda model. What's the core idea there?
In simple terms, it suggests that mainstream media often functions to filter information in ways that support powerful interests and marginalize dissenting views.
Right, acting like a filter.
Yeah. So back then, the dominant media were the official sermons, the government proclamations, the licensed books. They pushed the elite view. Religious conformity is good. Quakers are dangerous.
So the Stuart regime was trying to, what, manufacture consent for cracking down on Quakers?
In a way, yes. And the Quaker pamphlets and letters, that was the alternative press, the samizdat of its time, trying desperately to get a different story out without resources or official approval.
And their meeting for sufferings, which coordinated publications.
That sounds like an early version of an independent media outlet.
You could definitely see it that way, pushing back, trying to reframe the whole debate. Were they heretics or true Christians? Were they treasonous or just obeying God over unjust laws?
That battle over framing, over the narrative, it just doesn't seem to change, does it? Different tech, same fundamental fight.
It really is enduring. And another modern concept that fits perfectly is soft power.
Okay, define that for us in this context.
Soft power is about influencing people through attraction, persuasion, shared values, rather than coercion or payment. Making people want what you want.
Exactly. The Quakers had no real political muscle, no army. All they had was the power of their ideas and their example. Their writings consistently aimed for that image of integrity, piety, reasonableness.
Trying to appeal beyond their own group.
Definitely. When they talked about peace, seeking the good and welfare of all, like in that 1660 declaration, they were hitting on values many people shared, even if they weren't Quakers.
And you think that worked over time?
I think it contributed significantly. Their eventual success getting the Act of Toleration in 1689 wasn't just one thing, but that sustained projection of moral integrity, that soft power, surely helped erode the negative propaganda against them.
So it wasn't just about shouting louder, but carefully building this image of reasonableness and trustworthiness.
Precisely. And related to that is the idea of counterpublics.
Counterpublics, what does that mean here?
Think of them as alternative spaces, forums where marginalized ideas could be discussed and developed away from the dominant public sphere.
Like niche communities.
Sort of, yeah. For the Quakers, their actual meetings, but also their network of publications, created this space. It's where they hashed out their ideas, shared experiences, built solidarity.
A bit like online communities or independent media bubbles today.
Very similar function, allowing groups outside the mainstream to form their own understanding of the world and challenge the official story. Their literature built that strong Quaker identity while pushing back against the wider narrative.
And you mentioned their repetition, like light and truth.
Yeah, the constant emphasis on core themes. Fox hammering on light. Fell using those biblical proofs again and again. It's like early message discipline, really quite sophisticated.
So their writings were definitely propagandistic in the neutral sense, designed to propagate a message.
Absolutely. Carefully crafted communication designed to spread their beliefs and undermine the opposition's narrative. Very deliberate.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. If we boil down this deep dive, what are the main takeaways about these early Quakers and how they used writing?
I'd say the core thing is that their writing was an incredibly sophisticated and surprisingly effective form of counter-narrative, especially given the hostile environment they were in.
Right. They used rhetoric smartly. They jumped on the print technology.
And they consistently went head-to-head with the dominant religious and political ideas of the time. It was bold.
And the connections we've talked about, the parallels to modern media, propaganda models, soft power, they're pretty striking, aren't they?
They really are. It just shows how these dynamics, the fight over narratives, the power of alternative voices, the strategies for influence, they just keep reappearing, whether it's 17th century pamphlets or 21st century tweets.
It really gives you pause for thought. I mean, think about voices on the margins today, using digital tools to get their stories out, to challenge the status quo. What can we actually learn from how the Quakers did it? Their resilience, their communication skills, navigating our own very messy information world today.
It's a powerful reminder, isn't it, that even without huge resources, if you have a clear message, if you communicate strategically, and if you have that deep conviction, you can make a real difference, a lasting impact.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Lots to think about there.